I've always said the most difficult thing I've ever done is to talk about drinking with a drunk while they're drunk.
Mm-hmm.
You should have done that some other time. Even married couples, I say, look, deal with your issues when you're not in crisis. And the tendency is, oh, look, let's just let sleeping dogs lie. Things are going smooth right now. I don't want to bring up an issue. But that's when you need, when things are calm and smooth, that's what happens when you're putting this in the school curriculum. Before somebody is feeling anxious or depressed or lonely, with those feelings, these kids have taught me they also feel conspicuous. They think everybody can see this on me, and then the stigma comes. But you're talking about it as part of a routine curriculum where nobody feels targeted, nobody feels called out. You're just talking about, hey, these are some things that you can maybe use later.
Well, and let's dive into the specifics of that because that is an important part. So there's two ways to do that. One is to actually create mental health literacy or mental health vocabulary. And I'll talk about that first. If you think about physical health literacy, people know the difference between a sprained ankle and a broken leg, the difference between having a cold versus having the flu, unless, of course, you're male. Because when I have a cold, it's hard for me,
Yeah.
and I need a lot of love and support.
You have a
and,
man cold.
Yeah, I'm not sure,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's tough. But people have diagnostic criteria for diabetes and cancer. We need to do a similar thing where we set up different categories for mental health so that a kid understands everyday stress is not the same thing as an anxiety disorder. What's happening now is really confusing for kids because one kid will have an anxiety disorder and someone else will say to him or her, just, hey, calm down. But the opposite of having anxiety is not being calm, it's being able to see reality. The opposite of being stressed out, sure, could be calm. A lot of people are confusing going through a breakup with having clinical depression. They're not the same things. Or they confuse having an environment that they grew up in being traumatic with having a mental health disorder. They can be similar, but they're not the same thing. And then developmental disabilities exist somewhere in these categories too. So we teach concretely from as young as we can, there are different categories for mental health challenges. And then depending on what category you're in, it's going to determine what you need to do about it. So that's one thing. The second thing about how you manage it, if you think about a physical health spectrum, we tend to think of a physical health spectrum as there are people who don't have physical health issues, or you choose a physical. Let's back up. Let's take a physical health issue. Let's say it's somebody with a torn ACL. Well, then they start on the far end of they can't balance that, right? They need surgery, and after surgery, they may need constant assistance to balance it because they're going through physical therapy, and then they might use help to balance it. And then it might be not as difficult to balance, and then it goes away. It's they don't have to think about their ACL anymore. We have to treat mental health in the same way. Okay, so you have anxiety. Where are you on that spectrum? Do you just need help? You just need therapy? You just need medication? Okay. Is the anxiety so much that you can't balance it at all? That you need, to be in a residential facility? Or is the anxiety so low level that it's just difficult for you to sleep tonight, but you'll be okay tomorrow? What we tend to do with the mental health spectrum is we try to jam everything on it. So if you think about the mental health spectrum most people use, they think you're sane or you're not sane. But in between that, they're jamming depression, schizophrenia, eating disorders, bipolar disorder, everything on the same spectrum. We don't do that with physical health. With physical health, we choose one issue and then we measure functionality. With mental health, we tend to say you're sane or you're not. And the problem with that is, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 16. I'm also sane. I can't be on two ends of that spectrum. So those are concrete ways to change vocabulary. But the biggest thing that changes it is having a teacher normalize it in the classroom. So each summer at UCLA, we do a mental health teacher training institute because there are correct and incorrect ways for a teacher to normalize mental health. The incorrect way is for someone to go in and be seeking validation and to overshare and to follow a guideline that's not healthy for them, where they need the kids to support them. The correct way to do it is to only share experiences of your life that you process, to make sure that it has a learning objective that's relevant to the classroom, to use personal examples in an educational way. And when you do that, what you're talking about, the kids feeling conspicuous or that there's other things happening, it normalizes it for the whole building, not just that classroom. And then they see someone who is functioning, hopefully their teacher's functioning, who is sharing that they went through something, and the kids see, oh, this is a part of life. as opposed to, again, waiting until it's crisis mode and then trying to normalize it. You're normalizing it before that.
Yeah, I think back to Psych 101 when we went through the section on abnormal psychology, or when we took abnormal psych in grad school. There is that tendency to get every disorder that you read about.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody
Mm-hmm.
personalizes it. Have you found in creating the vocabulary, creating the glossary, that there's a short burst of everybody thinking, oh, I think I am anxious. I think maybe I am depressed.
So there's a couple ways to manage that. The first one is to list kind of the most, I just did this with a 7th grade class on Friday. It was a lesson I was teaching to 7th graders who are what, 12 and 13?
Yeah.
And what you do in it is you don't give them all the symptoms of from the DSM-5. Because if you give all the symptoms from the DSM-5, well, then easily any of us could sit there.
Yeah,
and
you're going to find a few for sure.
That sounds like me. You give the main symptoms and you emphasize that it has to be extreme for a diagnostic criteria. But before that, you go over who can actually diagnose people. So I have a little slide where I'm like, this is who can diagnose people: psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, counselors, and that's it. And then we do a slide of who can't diagnose you: the internet, TikTok, a song, a meme, your friend, your family. And they say, but what if my family is a psychiatrist? Even if that's the case, they should still be sending you to someone who's not your uncle. And go over the criteria first of what can actually happen. And then when you discuss the specific disorders, you don't give all the symptoms, you give the main ones, but you emphasize you have to not be doing the things you typically do. And what I've seen, even in that 7th grade class, was kids kind of having a sense of relief where they're like, oh, okay, that's not me. But I do see this in, someone else.
Yeah, it's so great that you're doing visuals with that, because even people that do get a hold of the DSM-5 criteria, they read the things that jump out at them, but they skip the parts down below, which are low down on the list, which say, okay, this has to be present for 6 months. It can't be secondary to some type of medication. They go all that stuff that's not such interesting reading. They just do the bullet points and check them off. But somebody needs to explain, and the way you're doing it is great. They're not getting diagnosed by TikTok or...
Well, they are.
Well, yeah, they are, but they need to understand that's not valid.
Yeah.
What is the outcome criteria when you do this sort of thing as part of the curriculum? How do you determine that, okay, this has landed, we've inoculated these kids to not being oblivious to this, we've put this up on a level with physical health, they've got the glossary, they got the vocabulary, they've got the awareness. What's the outcome criteria? How do you determine, okay, we're there?
I love this question because I think a lot of people think, oh, you teach this in the school, so your kids must have less stress, or they must sleep more, or they must, have some like magical ability, right? And the reality is, if we could change human behavior with this classroom, I wouldn't even be in this studio. I would be in sold out arenas.
Oh, yeah.
Like magically fixing human behavior. What our graduates who go through this program for, depending 7 to 4 years say when they get to college is that they're far more prepared than the students and the roommates and everyone else they interact with. They can identify mental health. There's no stigma for them to talk about it. They can access resources quicker, and they just have a much better way of knowing what they should do to balance. Do all of them do it? No. But when we teach physical health, not everyone does all of the skills that they learn to take care of their physical health either. So the outcomes we are looking for from a public health perspective is, what is their level of mental health literacy? What is the definition of mental health? What is their identification tools for coping mechanisms? And what is their ability to understand what they can or cannot do for a friend? And I can't emphasize that part enough, Dr. Phil, because kids are in the role of crisis management every night. I taught a class a couple months ago. I have an advanced wellness class. There are 23 students in that class, and they wanted to talk about suicide. I was like, okay, we can do that. So I asked them first, how many of you know someone who's thought about suicide? All of their hands went up. Then I said, how many of you know someone who attempted suicide? All 23 students' hands went up, which seems like a lot. So then I asked, how many of you know someone who took their own life, and all of their hands went up. And for the next hour, these students shared stories about trying to keep their friends alive, texting, calling, all kinds of levels of responsibility that they just shouldn't have. And for them, what I think one of the most poignant things one of my students shared was, she said, we just live in a constant state of fear. Because yeah, we were able to help this one person who didn't take their own life. We don't hear from them often about it again. We don't know if they're going to do it again. And no one talks to us about what it's like to be a friend in this situation and what we're supposed to do. So when we say that, like, a lot of times we say, oh, people aren't talking about this. Young people are talking about it, and they're relying on each other in the unhealthiest ways. And so one of the biggest measures has to be teaching young people what they can and can't do in friendships, because it's actually traumatizing them.